Dear colleagues, so we have the quorum and it's the appointed time, so let's start the meeting. We welcome the officials from the administration. Welcome. I will not introduce one by one. So I will give the floor to Ms. Kwan and your colleague for the introduction. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In respect to the introduction in the first meeting of the subcommittee and the Inland Revenue Bureau in terms of handling the EOI requests, whether the IRD will control it properly, so the document that we submit this time will set the details of how we handle this kind of requests for exchange of information. And in the past, under the CDTA, our previous experience, at the beginning we stressed that in handling this request, we have some international good practices. According to OECD, it is mentioned that the cooperation between all the jurisdictions should be promoted, but that doesn't mean that the jurisdictions can propose the random request for exchange of information. Other than that, this request must be showing the foreseeable relevance. That means it must be relevant to the taxes included in the agreement and the implement and relevant to the implement in its jurisdiction. Only in this way can the request could be made. And in the past, Hong Kong has signed 29 CDTAs with other jurisdictions, and under every agreement, there are requests for exchange for information. In the past, IRD has some practices to demonstrate that in the past, they adopted a very discreet way to handle these requests. In the same way, we can foresee that under the TIA, and there is no mechanism to handling under the CDTA. In paragraph 3 of the document, it is set out our key points of our arrangements. When the IRD receives requests from the contracting parties, it will review it one by one, case by case, to see whether it's in compliance with our local laws and international standards. And then a judgment will be made whether it meets the prerequisite, that means the international standards of foreseeable relevance. And besides, the IRD stressed that we cannot only rely on the claim of the other party, we should also look at the evidence and objective fact to make the judgment, and we will look at specific cases and provide proper assistance. If the information provided by the party is not clear enough, our past experience is that the IRD will, as mentioned in paragraph 4 in the document, the IRD has previously 17 cases where the requesting party did not show the foreseeable relevance. So in this way, the IRD didn't provide any information according to the request. And in the document, it is also mentioned that another guarantee that we have pay more attention to, that means in the current agreement, we didn't let the contracting party to use the requested information for other purposes, and it's emphasized in paragraph 7 in the document. In the logical brief, we also reiterated some guarantees, and they also apply to the current agreement. Last time we discussed in this committee that the urgency of our agreement. At this time, we would like to stress again that the agreement with the U.S. is to undertake Hong Kong's responsibility in terms of tax cooperation in the world. When discussing with the U.S. side, we have been trying hard to get some favorable conditions for Hong Kong. We did not allow overseas examination, and as for the taxes, now we have adopted the positive listing to list all the appropriate taxes. According to our past promise, the collected information are subject to the time of period of the disclosure of information. Last time we mentioned if the U.S. order are not passed in the logical, what the results, the agreement beside this time is to undertake our responsibility. If it is not passed, it is undoubtedly that we might be raise some suspicion around the world. That means we don't have enough determination to raise the transparency of tax, and this is to raise the basis for the intergovernment cooperation between Hong Kong and the U.S. after the FATCA is effective, and it will also extend to the FATCA and other intergovernmental agreements. And in the document, we have listed some supplementary items for the tax issues we mentioned last time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions from the members? In paragraph 3 of the document, you should look into the evidence. I will use the same case as last time. If there is a restaurant owner in the Chinatown, U.S., evade from tax, and he is suspicious that he transferred some money to Hong Kong. He has a bank account. If he says he has a Hong Kong account, but he cannot ask the Hong Kong banks one by one whether this U.S. citizen has a bank account in Hong Kong. For example, if he suspects that he has an account in Hong Kong and he is worried about the transfer of money to Hong Kong, how do you persuade him to transfer the money to Hong Kong instead of Singapore? Will you ask many questions? Or let's say maybe a citizen named Chen Taiman often traveled to Hong Kong, for example, once half a year. Will it suffice? Mr. Chairman, with respect to your question, or the case that we discussed last time, let's just forget this case. let me introduce our common practice. Usually, the foreign competent authority will point out that there is a sum of money from the jurisdiction transferred to a bank account in Hong Kong, and the bank account will be specified, and they will give it notice. Maybe this account does not exist in Hong Kong, and the other party in Hong Kong is not clear who owns the account, and the nature of the sum of money is not clear. Usually the question will be the receipt of the money in Hong Kong, and what does the receiver do, and the transfer, does it have anything to do with the transfer? For example, are the shareholder belonging to the same group of people, and the receiver, as for the receiver, does he own any money in Hong Kong? And the question would be usually like this. That means they will ask for very accurate evidence and the fact. He will not ask a question that do you have to give all the account details from Hong Kong to the U.S. The same example, if the boss Chen Tangman of a Hong Kong restaurant in Chinatown in U.S., and he transferred the sum of money to a company in Hong Kong, maybe a big sum of money. And technically speaking, if this company owns an account in Hong Kong, so you will have to help them to examine the account. It's not necessary. I mean, not unnecessary if you have to. According to CDTA and current AOI agreements, it is set out clear that if the authority can retrieve the information by themselves, he hasn't asked Hong Kong for the information. For example, the account belongs to a taxpayer in Hong Kong, then it should be the business of U.S. government to get the information. I mean, the person who owns an account in Hong Kong and also an account in the U.S. My question is very simple. I have an American account, and I'm a boss in the restaurant of a Chinatown, and I transferred $500,000 US to Hong Kong. That's the case. Maybe he's suspicious that this company is under control of the U.S. taxpayer or other relevant parties. It's from the person who owns the same group. He says, I need to know the background of the company, so help me check that. If you had some evidence to show that this company is your taxpayer or relevant person, so this is the difference. If you're like this, to me, you're just fishing. You're just practicing fishing expedition. Mr. Chairman, let me try to understand your statement. If we are lucky to encounter this situation, we will ask for evidence that this sum of money is actually transferred to Hong Kong. Secondly, we will make it clear that the U.S. government make it clear the nature of the sum of money transferred to Hong Kong. So we can ask the receiver in Hong Kong why you received this sum of money. So you have to ask. For example, I am a Hong Kong company. I have a U.S. citizen transferring some money to me. I will have to be investigated. So if the both parties have their information of their account very clear, like in a bank, if the account is very clear, I think there will be no issues like that. So you are the director of the IRD. I hope you can understand. The U.S. economy is a very large one, and there is a large population of American citizens, and the linkage between U.S. and Hong Kong is deeply rooted, and it is understandable that they ask the U.S. taxpayers to pay U.S. taxes no matter where they are in the world. But if a U.S. citizen transferred money from U.S. to other jurisdictions, you're in trouble. So unless you said this company is under the control of you and will do the certain procedures, but he is not a taxpayer. He just transferred a sum of money, and you will investigate the person to investigate his background, then it is not nonsense.
Mr. Chairman, as far as our experience is concerned, we have never encountered such an incident where a contracting party or our overseas counterpart approached us without supporting evidence. Ms. Check mentioned 17 cases. After reviewing these 17 cases, we realized that the supporting evidence was not enough. Therefore, these cases were declined. You've signed a good number of agreements, and how many of these counterparts require global taxation? Well, many countries require global taxation. Global taxation, I like to elaborate on the definition of global taxation. It can be at the level of a company or at the level of investors. Many countries only have one level of global taxation instead of two. And therefore, when we talk about global taxation, it's either the shareholder level or the investor level. I am extremely worried because the United States the American government is very aggressive, and it's very easy. If you want to be a nice person, then you could pass and you have to update us on a regular basis on all the statistics. For instance, how many requests are made or lodged in a year. If there are more than 7,000 requests lodged in 1 year, then so be it. However, as far as the materials are concerned, I can't really trust you, especially for Articles 3 and 4, in a way that I'm convinced. I am not convinced. What about members? Mr. Zhong? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Annex A submitted by the administration. Some 33 countries have signed agreement with the United States. On the 25th of March, Hong Kong signed it with the United States, and on the 27th of November last year. So the United States has signed agreement. I'm sorry, you are talking about 1463, bracket 2. Okay, go on, please. Annex A. Now, Mr. Chairman, so these jurisdictions, do they have to sign a new agreement with regards to EOI of financial institutions? Thank you, Mr. Zhong. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, it is necessary because they are not parallel. They are not similar. Because if we talk about intergovernmental agreement, then is relevant to compliance, and therefore they are two different. And the United States, once they pass the law, these countries, on theory, will have to sign the latest version of agreement, right? Correct. However, none of these jurisdictions has signed, or if they have signed, you have not updated us. Mr. Chairman, I do not understand. These are the countries that have signed. But some of them signed in 1984 or signed a contract in 2004. But this new rule was passed in the United States last year. Now, if these countries have to comply with the new rule, then those that signed a previous version in 1984 or 2004, would they have to sign the new agreement? Now, if these countries are ignoring this new rule, why do we have to sign the new rule? Mr. Chairman, let me explain. In document A that we submitted at the last meeting, it lists the jurisdictions that have signed. As far as the compliance is concerned, you have to refer to Annex B, footnote 2 and 3, that talk about the intergovernment agreement for version 1 and version 2. What are the countries that have signed? Currently, there are 24. On Model 1 and Model 2, there are 5. Australia, Bermuda, Chile, Japan, and Switzerland. I'm going to read it once more. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Deputy Commissioner or Ms. Guan, do you have anything else to convince me using a similar scenario? What else would you require before you would carry out the investigation on the recipient of the money? Mr. Chairman, just now, Ms. Guan mentioned that the IRD refused to carry out the investigation for 17 cases, and we have received 170 different requests so far, and therefore we reject 1 out of 10. And this is not really a low ratio. 1 out of 10 is being rejected. And our overseas counterpart will have to be convinced by us. We'll let them know that the request is not compliant with Hong Kong law or law settled in the agreement. And they did not object. And this indicates that we are keeping the gate, and these numbers can indicate to you that we are keeping the gate. And for EOI that we are going to sign with the United States also requires that the United States will have to provide us with information before we carry out the investigation. And I can be very confident to say that the number of documents required is the largest among all contracting parties that United States have signed a contract with. Well, because we require more information to be disclosed. And so using my previous example, this American citizen has a name, and it has a bank. It uses a bank, for instance, a New York bank, and he wires some money into a Hong Kong account. And then the IRS make the request for investigation. Are you going to carry out the investigation? Well, we will ask our American counterpart why they wanted to ask this question. Well, they will have to let us know that they are investigating or monitoring an American business which wires some money into a bank account in Hong Kong, and this American company or entity claims that this is for the payment of some goods, and the IRS suspected this person is avoiding tax. Are you going to ask the purpose Well, of course we are going to ask. If not, we are going to be doing a lot of work for the United States. Okay, if this American taxpayer is a restaurant owner and he claims that this money is for some commodities that he has bought, well, we have to look if they have a remittance. Well, simply we will have to examine this sum of money, for instance, 100,000, and we ask the recipient why you have received 100,000 US dollars from the United States. So you will ask somebody in Hong Kong because you received this request. Now, many people are very scared if the IRD has contacted them. So you contact a person and you ask this person, what is this money for? And therefore, I think your threshold is very low and you are going to be very busy. Now, it really depends if the American counterpart is kind. If the other American counterpart is kind, then they will only trouble you for very serious cases. Well, I mentioned that we are handling more than 170 cases, and many of these are multinational companies and corporations. Now, even without you making an example, I would have thought about this, because the Americans are very aggressive. This is my own analysis. Any congressman can make the American government to investigate a Chinese person. And the IRS may become very suspicious of Chinese restaurant owners. And then they will begin investigation, and that's going to make you very, very busy. And this is what the American government is like. It may not be a very large sum of money, however, you still have to do your work. Mr. Chairman, I understand your concern. However, I still need to stress, as a competent authority, we have to comply with Hong Kong law and all the obligations set out in the agreement. However, we are not going to do things offhandedly. I am not saying that you are doing things offhandedly. It's just your threshold. I'm talking about your threshold. The IRS asks an American citizen, and this American citizen said this money is for some goods or commodities. And yet this person is a restaurant owner, and therefore what kind of commodity a restaurant owner will have to buy? And the IRS is becoming very suspicious. And the IRS makes a request, and then somebody in Hong Kong is being irritated by you. Well, we're talking about a large enterprise. Many large enterprises have an auditor. Well, yes, you just have to go by with the books if they have an auditor. But I'm talking about a mom and pop shop. A mom and pop shop in Chinatown. They're buying something in Hong Kong and send it over to the United States. So using the same scenario, and the American IRS lodges a request, and you requires a business owner from Hong Kong to explain. So before you do that, are you going to look at this person's tax records, or you are going to approach this person in person and ask him, what is this money for? Who are your shareholders? Is any one of your shareholders an American citizen? Mr. Chairman, as far as our experience is concerned, we've never carried out any compulsory actions. Normally, the information that we have is taxpayers' record. And they would also submit an income statement and balance sheet, and therefore we have this information. And also we have public information, for instance, information from the company registration. These are all accessible to us.
If in the US side we check the company registry and it is not registered, I lend 500,000 to him and he disappeared. How does he answer? So your response to US is this guy is not registered, or will you ask for the nature of the commodities? I mean, we rely on our own detailed information. As for your case, it concerns the remittance from US. Normally, we don't have the record for that. So in this case, we will ask the information holder. We will send a letter to him saying that according to the tax record or under the relevant agreement, we would like to retrieve the information. I hope you provide that. If the data holder is the subject person, we will ask when we are providing documents to the competent authorities to the foreign countries, would you like to look at what kind of documents we are handling to them? If they ask us, I will provide them. According to our experience, I remember if in this case, to ask for the information is a very simple thing. It's a very simple and direct thing. To put it simply, you ask them, you have a $500,000 to the account, so you ask for the nature of the sum of money, and you ask the US side, and there was no response from them. Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, for example, if I sell some commodities and I receive the sum of money, so I post the invoices and other information to the IRD, and if there is a confirmation, we will organize a complete set of documents and hand them over to the US saying how much they have earned in Hong Kong. You are talking about the normal case. I understand what you say. I mean, if there is no response from them, will you take compulsory actions to get the answer? For example, $1.5 million from Chinatown in US, will you ask for it? If he has the reason to reject to answer, you can say that he does not answer your question. Mr. Chairman, I didn't encounter that case before. According to the Inland Revenue Ordinance, we have the right to ask for the nature of the money. As for the UIs, if the threshold is not high, you will use compulsory actions to protect the Hong Kong people's rights to evade from the investigation from US. To be frank, the restaurant owners in US have investment relationships with the Hong Kong people. They will send money from their children and grandchildren in Hong Kong, and people like that are of a great number. For the time being, Hong Kong has a bilateral tax agreement with UK, France, and Japan. And according to what I see with the three important trade partners, they have never asked for relevant data like what you said in the Chinatown restaurant case. Let me tell you, the US attitude is unpredictable. It's ever-changing. I know them. If it doesn't investigate, it's okay, but if it does investigate, that would be big trouble. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with you because I have a business relationship with U.S. people for more than 3 decades, and I don't believe in them. Like the case you talk about, Mr. Chairman, if the non-financial institutions are relieved, would that be better? Yes. And the trade company is not a financial institution. So my concern is that when you sign the agreement, the government of U.S. requested the financial institutions to sign the agreement, not the non-financial institutions. But you said according to OECD, the non-financial institutions are also included. If we can levy the non-financial institutions, that would be much better. One more question. I read Annex B, and there are 27 countries or regions who have signed the agreement with the U.S. Among these countries or regions, are they all compliant with the standards of OECD to give the relevant information of non-financial institutions to U.S.? Will they all accept this requirement? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At present, the agreement with U.S. is showing the relationship of tax cooperation according to international standards and other agreements signed with other jurisdictions. The coverage is not limited to financial institutions, and it's agreed among the international jurisdictions, and it is compliant with the international standards. Mr. Chong asked about the Annex B in the document submitted last time. Among the 27 jurisdictions listed, it is talking about the intergovernmental agreement. The coverage is limited to financial institutions. So there are two different topics, but there are some overlap areas. However, they are the same thing in its nature. Mr. Chairman, so here we have the intergovernmental agreement. Did we sign the agreement? Mr. Chong is asking the question. As for the agreement of FATCA, we have completed the relevant discussions with the U.S. side, but we didn't formally sign the agreement because the U.S. side has some internal procedures to deal with. We can start the signing of the agreement after their procedures are completed. Mr. Chairman, so in general, it's no problem. Can we implement that in the short term? Thank you, Mr. Chong, for your question. I believe in this year the agreement will be signed. We have completed the discussions with U.S., but the U.S. government requests for a buffering time for the approval. So we will wait for the U.S. side to complete their internal procedures before we sign the agreement. But the negotiation is generally completed between the two governments, and we have successfully formed the framework. Mr. President, if it is the case, Ms. Guan said some countries signed the intergovernmental agreement. If that's the case, then it is possible that the non-financial institutions are relieved from the tax. The agreement does not cover non-financial institutions. The IGA doesn't cover any institution besides financial institutions. So that means the non-financial institutions does not have to sign the agreement. If the tier is passed, the non-financial institution will be covered. As Ms. Kwan said, some countries or jurisdictions because of the signing of the agreement, has some different contents in the agreement. If the IGA is signed, so can we exclude the non-financial institutions this time? This is my question. So the question is answered for 2 times. What he means is that, 1, the model agreement is not like that. Second, the other agreements signed between U.S. and other countries are not limited to financial sector. So in this way, you can sign the agreement, but it's only for the financial institutions, and it's only her prediction. But we are talking about the framework of OECD, and we have to put the non-financial institutions in the scope. What the OECD says that you don't have to exclude the non-financial institution, but you sign the agreement with the U.S. side, you should include the financial institutions. It seems that we comply with the WTO agreement standard. So will part of the 27 countries ignore this standard? I didn't study that. Mr. Chairman, as for IGA, it covers only financial institutions. And there will be also the arrangement for exchange of information. It refers to the financial institution, but there will be some arrangement for information exchange. And they're not inter-exclusive. So if we sign IGA, it must be the legislation of Hong Kong. As for the IGA, we don't have to deal with the legislative procedures regarding that. If the tiers is not passed, so we have to sign the IGA only. If tier is signed, so we have the framework. As for the tier, if it is unfortunately repealed by the legislature, we have to look at the IGA, because the precondition for IGA is that the tax authorities of both sides can have agreement regarding tax matters. So if the bills are repealed, so we have to sign the IGA. Because of the filibustering action, our time is very urgent, so it's always calling for counting the quorum. So before 11 o'clock on Friday, the debate cannot be completed. So we have to put it in another meeting, and the extension is not permitted. So the government is very insistent that this order must be passed. Mr. Chung, I'm talking about the fact. We are not encouraging anything. So if you ask me, I have made what I think very clear, and I will report to the House Committee factually. Let me put it simply. Can you do this? Every year you give the information to the subcommittee, like a panel on financial services. You give the relevant information, like how many times, to the panel. Can you do that? Mr. Chairman, I think we can do that. I think it's okay. I think it's more practical. The commissioner said will it be certainly a large number of the cases next year, and I hope that won't happen. At least we should know what the situation is. I don't mean that we don't have to talk. I think we have made ourselves clear. At least you have the opportunity to speak. And for me, I have made myself clear. My concern is still there. I think the non-financial institutions should not be covered. And I even want to repeal it and discuss that again, but that's not possible. So we have to look into that thing in the future more carefully.
And of course, we can continue to say more if you don't think you have said enough. If not, then we are going to monitor it closely. Mr. Deputy Commissioner and Ms. Guan, we are very concerned. We are not encouraging Hong Kong people to evade American taxes. It's just that once the IRS wants to conduct an investigation, it's going to be so annoying and so irritating, and it's going to create fears, and they have to pay legal fees, and it's going to be very unsettling. And consequently, they may refuse to do any business with Americans. And so this may not be a good thing. And they realize that the IRS is so aggressive, and they may decide not to do business with any Americans. Or they receive some money from the United States to buy properties, to open a restaurant, and yet they are being investigated by IRS, and they may eventually decide not to work together with any Americans. And we have to be concerned about this possibility. And of course, the IRS will have to consider their own actions, because if they are being too aggressive, they may result in less business activities. Mr. Zhou. Mr. Chairman, I agree that we cannot repeal it. However, I would like for the administration to regularly update us. For instance, the number of requests being lodged every year, and so that we can have a peace of mind. And we will also know how much influence it is imposing on investors. Any questions? If not, anything else we have to talk about? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Now, if we have reviewed everything, then we have extended, and the chairman has also submitted another request, which is scheduled to take place on the 28th. But it's probably not going to be handled. That is to say, on the 28th, it will expire, and on the 20th of June, this order will become effective, and we're going to submit a written report. Therefore, we don't need to submit a report. If we were to do it, when is the deadline? If we are just talking about a report, then we could do it, but we're not going to debate on it. Let's just report, so that put it in black and white. No. Okay. So I will summarize comments from members. You will submit a report and then orally report it. Okay, so we'll line up for it. It should be on agenda item number 1. But we cannot finish it by the 28th. Well, of course, probably after the 4th of June, I may have to let members to digest the information. And yes, of course. Okay, we'll take time. We'll take time. And of course, the best is to finish it by the 20th before it is effective. Anything else? No other business. Thank you. Are we done? Yes. But if there is a miracle, for some unknown reason, we may debate on it on Thursday, but with a very low possibility. Thank you.